This season, Taniela speaks to endometriosis and chronic illness patients, those who are going through or have gone through the pain and the diagnosis of endometriosis and are navigating this extremely common but poorly understood condition. Over the last few years, an army of patients have arisen. They are speaking out, fighting back, doing their own research and raising awareness of endometriosis. Let's listen to these brave warriors who have decided that enough is enough and who will stop at nothing to reclaim their health.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Not Defined by Endo. Today's episode is with lovely Kailey Lee and Betsy Austin. Kailey and Betsy host the Nurture Mama podcast, where they talk about endometriosis, adenomyosis, infertility, and childlessness in their 30s. I particularly love how they talk about being child-free and not childless, and the very important message that not having a child does not make you less. They regularly share insights into their daily lives with chronic illnesses and their pursuits to redefine worth and enjoyment of their kid-free lives. They are also on Instagram at Nurture Mama Pod. All the information can be found in the show notes. So join me today and let's listen to Kailey and Betsy's stories.
Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome to the show, Betsy.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
I'm so excited to speak to you girls, honestly. I think I was saying to you before that I just love the way you guys talk on the show. I think I really like listening to, co-hosts because I like the dynamic and the way you bounce off each other.
Well, we really appreciate that. We have a lot of fun and sometimes it's a little bit of a train wreck, but
I edit it out. It's okay.
Yeah, Kailey takes care of everything.
We're yin to our yang a lot. We complement each other where one is strong in one area, the other one is really good at jumping in. So I'm lucky to have her.
I love what you're doing. And I love the name of the podcast as well. I actually love the name of the podcast and I love the your Instagram name as well, Journey to Fix My Lady Parts.
I appreciate that. So when it started, Betsy was my uterus life too. And I think the comedic side of our Instagram names is kind of what drawn me to her. Cause I'm like, okay, she gets it. Like we're making the best of what we're at.
Yeah. Which is actually one of the things I was going to ask, like, how did you guys meet each other? What's the story there?
B, you want to go?
I have no idea. No. So, my Instagram, was originally my uterusless life. And I had started it with the intention of connecting with other people who had hysterectomies at a young age. Mm. That was pretty much like my biggest intention. I was a couple months out from my hysterectomy. And I was like, I'm sure there are other young people out there. So how do I find them? And then I'm sure I mentioned Endo and that journey. And randomly, I think Kailey had started following me. And then I threw out a question before my husband's birthday, like he's really into craft beer. And I was like, hey, is anyone willing to send me some beer? And it's illegal, so don't do it.
Yes, I was going
to say, So Kailey sent me some barbecue sauce.
Oh, wow.
And
we became friends pretty quick.
We did. We became very quick friends. She's into craft beer. I'm into craft beer. So it was like we had a really quick, instant connection. Am I missing anything?
I guess it would be good to notice is we've actually never met in person.
No.
We have a trip planned, but this is all virtual friendship at this point. I mean, I pretty much talk to her just as much as I talk to my family.
Oh, wow.
But yeah.
That's actually amazing. It's crazy what technology has done for us, especially, with COVID and everything that we know is now possible. I just imagine how it would have been like, let's say 5 years ago. Like, it's crazy the things that we can now do, like have friends from across the world, like speak to you guys.
It is incredible.
It is. And the friendships I feel are very genuine because you're actually making friendship, is, two-way and you're making an effort. So for it to be working, you guys are doing something right.
Yeah. I was just going to say also there's something very transparent about when you're sharing your story on the internet with strangers, because you're probably a lot more open. I know I am a lot more open than I am with a lot of the people in my very close circle.
Definitely.
Because I'm like, these people don't know me. They're not going to judge me. Like, a lot of them are going through the same thing. So I feel like there's a lot more like genuine friendship that can grow from that.
Yeah, I agree.
I was going to say the same thing. We had a baseline understanding. Even though our experiences are different, we understand when each other talk. And so right away, you know, our past is similar enough. We understand each other's pain, and we both are going towards this kid-free, kidless life. And so our lives correlate. And then to add on top of it, she's a really cool person and we have a lot of same interests. So then I DM'd her one day and I said, hey girl, I want to start a podcast and I want you to be a part of it. And she crazily said yes to me. And here we are with Not Your Mama.
Oh, amazing, amazing. So who came up
slid into your DMs, B?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. We legit had a list of like 15 names, like 30 and thriving. And I'm sure there's a whole list somewhere. So and I do not know how it came to be Not Your Mama.
So it's funny. I think the way when we created the podcast, concept to reality to first episode was actually relatively quick. And I think it showed me really quickly that we were going to work together, because we just started cramming out names and thinking of concepts and things like that. I mean, I think we had 60 or 70 episode topics down before we ever even thought about how we were recording.
Wow.
And I do remember we had something similar to Not Your Mama, and Betsy had thrown it out there, and we just started kind of word playing on it, because at first we really thought it was going to be endo and adeno based. And then we realized we were much more than just our chronic illnesses. And so I don't know, when we found it, it was just like, this seems right for our personalities. Let's deep dive to make sure it's not taken and run.
Yeah. It was just kind of like a funny, kitschy name. And I think that it definitely fits who we are as people for 100%.
Sure.
Yeah, definitely. So for everyone listening, Not Your Mama podcast is done by two lovely ladies, Betsy and Kailey, and it's all about endometriosis, adenomyosis, and who they are outside of infertility. So trigger warning, if you feel like this is a bit too much for you, feel free to skip this episode, but come join us on this conversation, and I know it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yes, it will be.
And thank you again for having us. We really appreciate you and what you're doing.
Thank you so much. So let me start with Betsy. Tell me about your journey from, whenever you want to, from birth, if you want to. From birth. But from
wherever. I graced this earth. Yeah, that's where she's going to start.
I
was born on March 12th. I am
the diagnosis.
Yes, I am 33. I am very shortly going to be 34, actually, in like 3 weeks. And my endo journey started from my first period. I think I started my period around like 11, 12 years old. I had really, really terrible periods from the start, like very, very painful, very heavy bleeding, but short term. So it wasn't like I had like these extensive periods. So it would be like 3 days, but it'd be like the worst 3 days of my entire month. So basically the same deal from the start of me going to the gynecologist. I was like, hey, I have really bad periods. Like, I'm fairly certain it's not normal. And they're like, oh no, it's normal. Like, bad periods are normal. So fast forward a few years. I just had pain with my period for a while. And then in my early 20s, we started to try and have a baby. So that was not successful. The very short version is that was not successful. But we were able to see a reproductive endocrinologist pretty quickly. I did 6 rounds of Clomid before deciding that it made me a crazy person. Like, very genuinely, it made me a psychopath.
Yeah.
So somewhere in there, I started to have like daily pelvic pain. I was having like very regular cysts burst. Having to use my heating pad daily. Like, I had one at work, I had one at home, just because I was in so much pain all of the time. I was bleeding probably definitely more than half of the month, like very, very regularly. I probably had like maybe 7 days where I wasn't bleeding in some form. So it was like just continuous, really painful. So finally, my husband's like, this is not normal. Like, you to be in very daily pain, completely not normal. You need to go to the doctor. So I went to the doctor in 2019 and I was like, hey, I'm having like a ton of pain. And I had really painful sex at that time too, like really, really painful. And so they're like, okay, we'll do an internal ultrasound. So they did an internal ultrasound and found a couple cysts. I will say that the lady who did my ultrasound at that time was terrible, like really bad. Spent 20 seconds in there and I was like, I think I have a cyst on my left ovary. And she's like, how do you know you have a cyst? And I was like, well, I don't. Or she's like, how do you know where your ovary is? I'm like, well, I have a general idea and I'm fairly certain that's where it's at. So she took some quick pictures, very quick, like fastest ultrasound of my life. And I went and talked to my doctor and he's like, oh yeah, I think you just have some cysts. They'll probably go away, but if you want me to he said, if you want me to melon ball them, I can go in and surgically do that. And I was like, well, that sounds terrible. Like, that sounds not like a fun way to do that. So I was like, okay, if you think they're going to go away, I'm just going to let it go. Continue on. So through the next year, I've just progressively got worse and worse, like just constant pain. I really like working out. It was affecting my workouts. It was affecting my daily life. So I went back and I was like, I am very passive. Like, I just want peace for everyone. Like, but I was like, I'm going to fight for myself. Like, this has to be done. So I went in and I'm like, listen, I'm having so much pain. And he's like, just when you're having sex, right? I'm like, well, first of all, even if it's just when I'm having sex, like, that should not be happening. But yeah, but I was like, no, literally all of the time. So he's like, okay, let's do another internal ultrasound and we're going to test you for interstitial cystitis. So basically, if you don't know what that is, it's called painful bladder syndrome, because I also have like a lot of pain when I urinate. My bladder feels very full all of the time. It's just like I can pee at any point. I mean, so they did another internal ultrasound. And at this point, I had just the best ultrasound tech of my life. I'm pretty sure she saved my life. She took her time. She took pictures of every inch of my inside. Very, very detailed. Took maybe hundreds of pictures, like, honestly. And so obviously my interstitial cystitis was fine. Like, I passed that test. But my internal ultrasound, they saw that both of my tubes were enlarged and filled with fluid and blocked, which was called salpingitis. So my doctor is like, basically the only way you're ever going to be free of pain is for us to remove both of your tubes. And I said, okay, if we do that, I'm still going to be able to have kids, right? Like, that seems important to me. And he's like, yeah, it should not be a problem. Like, you'll have to do IVF if you choose to. I will also preface this by saying we had come to terms like a couple years prior that we were okay with not having children, but there's something about like still having your organs that you're like, is this final? It's probably not final yet. So in August of 2020, I went in and I had planned to have a surgery to remove both of my fallopian tubes. They were only able to access one of my tubes because the other one was literally cemented together with my other organs. So my ovary, my left ovary, fallopian tube, bowel, ureter, and some major blood vessels were all attached to the side of my uterus. So at that time, they also determined that my uterus had adenomyosis. And so they only could take out one of my tubes at that time. So we had to schedule, he's like, listen, this is really bad. Actually, my husband had to tell me that more than likely I was going to have a hysterectomy if I wanted to be free of any of this pain. So we scheduled hysterectomy for November. So that was August. November was my hysterectomy. And at that time, they also removed all of my organs on that side and my adhesions and what endo he could. So I did. I was pretty much pain-free, like immediately after the surgery, because they took out literally a crap ton. Sorry, excuse me. I'm not like all of my junk, essentially, all of my diseased organs. They took it out, and I felt much better immediately. I probably had like 6 months of full pain relief. Like now I can feel I have some endo coming back. I'm definitely not anywhere where I was, but that is the very brief story of my journey from diagnosis.
Thank you so much for sharing, Betsy. I really appreciate you being very transparent, and I appreciate how tough it can be to, there are points where, as you're saying your story, you almost like the emotions, come back when you remember, how you felt when you're told that, wow, your uterus, because you said before that they said, of course, you can still have a baby. And then all of a sudden they're saying, actually, that's not possible. So I'm really thankful that you have the courage to share this. And I'm really sorry that you have to experience this. Yeah.
It's really interesting, though, how quickly you come to terms with it, though, because from the time that they said, hey, if you want to be pain-free, we're going to have to take out your uterus. And I'm like, immediately take it out, because at that point, my quality of life was worth more to me than becoming a mom.
Yeah.
And thankfully I had, like I said, come to terms with it like a few years beforehand. Like we were going to be in a very comfortable spot if we chose not to have children. It wasn't a choice that we had, intentionally made at that time. Now it is. Like now we live a very fun, child-free life, I would say. But it's a crazy journey.
It is. It is. I have so many questions. I'm trying to think which one should I ask next. But I wanted to touch on something you mentioned, and it's very important because one of the sonographers, so the first sonographer that did your ultrasound was like, how do you know where your ovaries are?
Yeah.
I think that's wrong in every sense of the word, because we are women, it's our body. And sometimes I feel like the medical professionals, they first of all treat us like we should not know anything about our bodies, and we should know. It's mine. Like I know you've got the education and all of that, but it's my body and I'm living in it. So I think one thing I would just want to mention and highlight here is that was really wrong for her to first of all assume that you don't know what you're talking about, because that's where the doubting and the gaslighting comes in. And secondly, everyone listening should actually work hard to understand and know your body. Don't be ashamed, don't be afraid to say, I think this is how I feel. If I'm wrong, then prove me wrong. But you don't have to doubt me first thing and think I don't know what I'm talking about. So that was really something I wanted to mention.
No, it is very frustrating too, because you're like, well, maybe it's not, like, and it does. It immediately makes you doubt yourself, and you're like, well, what other organs are down there that it could be? And also, why is your initial reaction like, oh, how do you know that? Well, I don't. That's why I'm here, for you to prove to me one way or the other whether I'm correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly. Oh man, Kailey.
That was like a super fast information dump on you.
Yes, I'm like, oh God. But thank you. No,
we have a lot.
We have so much to talk about, but let's go to Kailey. Let Kailey share her story, and then I'll ask more questions, and then anyone can answer.
Yeah. So I will start with saying Betsy is the sweetest, strongest woman I know. And every time she shares her story, I want to go back in history and like throat punch like 6 people. I'm not okay with it.
Yeah, I agree.
So I always enjoy when she talks. My story is similar and different. I don't have a lot of childhood memories at that time in my life. I know my periods were really bad, flow-wise, like really heavy. I had pain, but within a year and a half, I was on birth control in middle school without really a discussion. My mom had a hysterectomy in her early 30s. She does not know if it was endometriosis or adeno, but she had something, a lot of similar experiences to me. And when she visibly saw I was sick, I was put on birth control without a discussion. Honestly, without an exam. I walked into a doctor's office, her and the OB at the time talked, and I walked out for a prescription. The only thing that was talked to me was, "Are you sexually active?" And I was like, "No, I'm like 12 or 13. No." And he's like, "Okay, here's your birth control." And then we left, and my mom looked at me and said, "Do not tell your dad. I don't want to explain to him why you're on birth control." So I never said a word. So from the jump, I was on the pill, and I do think it was a Band-Aid that helped some of my symptoms. I always had period bags with me. I always had issues with some sports. I know I was passing blood clots in high school, but I thought it was normal and just went on with life. I actually stayed on birth control until my early 20s. I didn't have a pelvic exam until I was a senior in high school. So 6 years after starting birth control. And then it was me as a 18-year-old by myself in a doctor's office. So I was just trying to get through it because I didn't even know what a pap smear was going to be. And so I didn't voice any issues. I also went to high school. During my high school years, I lived with my father. So we did not discuss anything. Going to college, just went with the same thing. I know I went to an OB a couple of times because I was having so many blood clots that I thought something was wrong. And they just told me it was normal. So I said, cool, I'll get bigger tampons. I'll get more pads. Again, a girl doing it by herself, no one to call. And then in my early 20s, we had decided to try to have children. And the only kind of recognition I had is my mom growing up telling me that when it became time to try to have children, I would probably have issues. And I was like, well, what does that mean? She's like, it was really hard for me. You'll probably have some female issues when you try to conceive. So I always had this voice in the back of my head that says, it's going to be really, really hard for you to become a mom because whatever my mom had, but no context with it. And unfortunately, that kind of washed my story because from day one, all I focused on was becoming a mom and the things that my body was doing were nah, that could go to the back page. That's normal. That's not the issue here. The issue here is that I'm not a mom. So I ignored blood clots. I ignored fevers. I ignored intense pain. I just lived on ibuprofen and kept it moving. There's points where it was hard to go to work, but I just did because that's what you do. And we went to the point of birth control. I stopped, and the discussion was we're not actively trying, but we're open to having children. My body's probably going to need some time. I've been on birth control my entire life. Let's just be prepared. And it never happened. We went from not trying to tracking to all the things. And it just was not successful. I started having some chemical pregnancies, and I started having a lot of emotion tied to those because every single time I had a chemical pregnancy and it failed, I realized I was broken, was my term. So something's wrong with me. I'm broken. I started seeking medical help, and of course, only for infertility.
Yeah.
Because as long as I became a mom, I didn't care. And in 2016, as I was starting the process for IVF, I naturally conceived out of nowhere. And I carried my baby for a term. And unfortunately, trigger warning, I miscarried. My kid would have been 5 actually next month. So it's taken me 4 years to be able to say that out loud. But I am super honored and grateful for the experience I did get to be her mom. So I miscarried in 2017, and I spiraled really bad mentally. I was depressed. I didn't think I could talk about it. I already had this context of hating my body. So now my body didn't let me be a mom. And I'll leave the terminology to that because I was saying some really horrible things about my body that I just shut down, and my body just freaked out. My endo was finally like, I have had enough. I started bleeding 60 days at a time. I became anemic because I was constantly bleeding, constantly having blood clots. I went through rounds of different types of birth control just to try to regulate myself. Nothing was working. And each month things were getting worse. And I'd go through these mental spurts where I'm like, okay, something's really, really wrong. I need to go see a doctor. I need to fix something. And then I'd get PTSD, or I'd be really upset. My OB had a really bad habit of forgetting that I miscarried. And so every single time I'd go there and be like, hey, I have bled for 65 days. I feel like I'm going to pass out. They'd be like, okay, well, have you ever been pregnant? And then I'd bawl and be like, yeah, remember? And so I just stopped going because I was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to keep telling you that I can't be a mom. And so I stopped. I got on some birth control I actually got switched to the NuvaRing with some honky tonk conversation with my doctor about like, it'll make you feel better because your body's not digesting the pill. It's straight to the uterus. Got on the NuvaRing and it was like okay-ish enough that I could start going. Like I wasn't missing work. I could do things. And then the pandemic happened. And I think the added stress and the moment to slow down and whatever else, my body just gave out. I ended up pretty much being bedridden, which it was kind of a blessing in disguise that I was working from home because I just did my job from my bed. But I got to the point that I was bleeding constantly. I was passing $half size blood clots constantly. I couldn't keep food down. My bowels hurt. I started having a lot of things like that when I was using the bathroom, which cliff notes, I've had IBS, I've had scopes, I've had all sorts of stuff, ulcers, diagnosed, things like that. It was endo, but misdiagnosis throughout my journey. Saw like 12 doctors during the pandemic, which is so difficult because I was on a pandemic wait list. Finally found a doctor that knew what endo was. Got transferred to a reproductive endocrinologist after that. During this whole conversation, I still was telling people that I would be bedridden for the rest of my life and figure out how to succeed if they could make me become a mom. So still in all of this, like my hope was still to somehow have the opportunity to be a mom someday.
Yeah.
And fix my body long enough that I could be a mom. I found a doctor that knows endo. He is horrible, bedside manner, but he knows endo, and there's very few of them here. And February of 2021, I had my laparoscopy and my ablation because he does not do excision. And I was to the point that I could barely make it 30 minutes across town in a car, let alone travel to a different state for surgery, and had surgery. And then this last year has been kind of crazy. I had surgery still with the hopes that I could become a mom. So a lot of our conversations were, hey, when you're done, you'll do a medicated menopause. Hey, when you're done with that, you're going to go on a breast cancer medication because I can't do Clomid because I've already miscarried. Hey, IVF doesn't look like an option for you for these reasons. And so I was just trying to heal so I could have an opportunity, right? And I got back on birth control and I realized I feel horrible. And because I had surgery and I felt horrible and I know he didn't get it all, he was just getting enough so I could be pregnant. I started feeling sick, and somewhere between my mourning, which I had never mourned my daughter, I'd never mourned a lot of things. I had a pandemic. There's a lot of emotional things going on.
Yeah.
Over the last year and a half, I just kind of realized I want to feel good. And I know I'm not going to feel great, but I want to do what I can to have a happy life. And it slowly transitioned to me not taking these crazy medical jumps to try to achieve a goal, and me mourning things, and me coming to terms with the idea of being infertile, and me coming to terms with the idea of not having kids. And I still identify as kidless because I would like to be a mom, and I didn't choose not to be a mom. But I'm slowly going toward kid-free. I love where my life is heading. I'm happier, stronger, better person than I was before endo. I have pretty cool friends. Like, I wouldn't take any of it back, but it just is part of my story. So endo was always there from jump. It's made me sick. It still makes me sick. I am trying holistic approaches right now to feel better, to be able to function. I probably pretty close to needing another surgery.
Yeah.
But I don't really want to make a dramatic choice right now because I'm still trying to figure out who I am before I start cutting myself open again, which is such a sad thing that we have to consider.
Your story is also just so powerful and like gets me every time too. So if you guys do not know Kailey, if you do not follow Kailey, you're missing out. Like I know this is not my podcast. I don't mean to hijack it.
No, it's fine.
But I just like her story gets me every time, and it's heartbreaking and it's unfortunate, and she's awesome because of it.
Oh, Kailey, you're amazing. Thank you so much.
You.
I actually have listened to, it's crazy because like you were saying to me earlier before we started recording, I listened to the episodes of your stories, but you know how sometimes it's like you've not heard it well, like because I was listening to it in the car, and now I'm listening to it again and tears are in my eyes. I'm like, how can one person go through so much pain? And I'm really thankful, like I said to Betsy earlier, for your courage that you can share this. And thank you so much, because I don't know where you get the courage, where you're so strong, and I'm really grateful for you. And I know that through your podcast, through your journey, through your story, someone somewhere will be encouraged and will learn how to be regardless of, it doesn't mean that you should not still want to be, a mom if you want to be, like, but I think it's about acceptance, which I know you're on a journey to acceptance, and I'm really grateful for you, and I'm thankful. And I'm so sorry that you have had this experience. I'm sorry for all of us, like, why?
Yes, sorry for all of us. No, I appreciate that. And what I told B is, it's interesting because when it comes to a chronic illness and it comes to infertility, you try so many things and you're so engulfed in it for so many years that every time you talk about it, the different information may come out because there's so many different fragments, right? And the story you share is the story for that time and the story for your life. And you had talked to me a year and a half ago. I was still trying to figure out how to fix my body, which is what coined my IG name. Journey to fix my lady parts. I actually don't feel like I have to fix myself anymore. Now it's more of like accepting myself and figuring out what wellness and happiness is. And I share my story because I think people sharing their stories is the only reason I survived it, to be honest with you. I was so depressed. I didn't want to do life. I hurt and I was sad and there's nothing right in the world and it wasn't fair. And then I meet people like Betsy who I'm like, okay, there's a different option in life and I'm going to work towards that.
Yeah. And when, just to touch on what you said, little love, when you touched on how you, because of what your mom said to you about, the fact that you might have issues, I think that was really a moment that almost like created trauma or pre-trauma or something in you, where I think that fear was always there, like, oh my God, something is already wrong with me, even if it wasn't then. And it had been playing on your mind from childhood, and when it finally happened, it must have been heartbreaking that it actually happened, or it is happening to me. So that must have also been tough. But I'm really, like, it hurts me so much because the statistics say that people with endometriosis, 50% of them will struggle with infertility. So why is it that through your infertility journey, no one could say this might be endo, and I feel like we lose a lot of years, like things might have turned out differently, but because we lose 10, 15 years just trying to survive, trying to, it's like maybe the statistics would be even slightly better. But because we spent so many years and we're all in our 30, like 34, 35, and you're like, wow, I'm almost 40 and I'm still here struggling with this. And now my quality of life has declined. And I just think there's a big problem in medicine with endometriosis and, many of our gynecological conditions, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
It's so under-researched, underfunded, underknown that if somebody would have listened to me from the time I was 18, that I was going to the gynecologist regularly, where I'm like, hey, I have really bad periods. I am in debilitating pain. I'm vomiting every single month. Like, that is not a normal thing.
No, it's not.
Yeah. We're not taught to advocate for ourselves from a young age. We're taught to, for better terms, shut up and take it. Like it's a period that's supposed to be bad. I think my mom also made it really difficult for me because it made me very solo focused on reproduction rather than listening to my body.
Yeah.
And even when I miscarried, I woke up and had signs of a miscarriage and went in that day. And I remember telling my OB at the time that, like, number one, if I come back in a week and this isn't viable, I'm going to lose my mind, because I've tried for 4, 5, 6 years to have this baby. So number one, you need to talk me through the process of the decisions I'm going to have to make now. But number two, I want to know why it's happening. Post miscarrying, because I did it at home by myself. Post miscarrying, I went back in and had to do a second round of a medication because I still had a ton of blood flow in my uterus, which probably was endo, not necessarily the embryo still being there, the baby being there. But after that, I said, I want to know why this happened. You know, my mom had multiple miscarriages. My mom had hysterectomy at 30. My mom had something wrong with her. She doesn't remember what it was, but she had a diagnosis, right? It was probably adeno, from what I've understood, and probably endo and adeno, but I don't have her medical papers to know. And the pushback I got is, oh, it's your first miscarriage. It's okay. Sporadic and undefined miscarriages happen. So as long as you don't have 2 or 3, we're not worried about it. At that point, I'm telling you, I have all these issues. I have a family history. My body hurts. It took me years to get pregnant, and you're just going to write me off.
Wow.
You're just telling me it's okay. It's okay that I lost a baby. Like,
it's fine. It happens. As long as you don't do it multiple times, you're cool. And I was like, there's plenty of women in this world that have miscarried an outrageous amount of times, and my heart goes out to them, and I'm in awe of their strength. I'm telling you right now, I'm not one of them. The one ruined me. It shaped a lot of my decisions on trying things. Between that and failed adoptions, my heart's broken. And for somebody to just minimize my situation and not figure it out. I mentioned I went through dozens of doctors, and it was because every time I was like, it's endo, it's adeno, it's PCOS. There's something wrong with me. What are you going to do to figure it out? And having to turn around and walk away because of the medical gaslighting is not something a woman should have to do on top of dealing with her body. It's frankly unfair.
Exactly.
Deep breath.
All of us. It's a lot.
Join us in the next episode for part 2 of this conversation.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the podcast. Don't forget to share, rate, and subscribe. If you'd like to share your story, please reach out on Instagram or Facebook, or send an email to info@notdefinedbyendo.com. Till next time, remember, you are not defined by endo.